A white wolf refused to leave a dying bear cub in the middle of the Arctic winter. What happened next shocked every scientist who saw it. In northern Canada, where temperatures dropped below -40, a young Arctic wolf did something no researcher had ever documented in the history of wildlife science. He found an injured bear cub trapped under collapsed ice, and instead of walking away, instead of seeing prey or a threat, he laid down beside it. He wrapped his white body around that dying cub and refused to move. For hours, through the worst cold of the season. And what unfolded over the next 5 years would force scientists around the world to completely rethink everything they thought they knew about the boundaries between species, about instinct, and about the nature of love itself. Before we begin, if survival stories move you, subscribe to Arctic Wolf Legends and leave a like. Tell us in the comments what time it is and what city you're watching from. Now, let's get into it. Dr. Emily Carter checked her tracking equipment for the 3rd time that morning. At 41, she had spent 16 years studying wolf behavior across some of the most brutal landscapes on Earth. She had tracked packs through Siberian storms and Scandinavian winters, but nothing compared to the Canadian Arctic in the dead of January. Her research station, a cluster of small insulated buildings wedged between stands of black spruce, was the only sign of human life for over 100 miles. Beyond it, there was nothing but ice and silence. Her team had been tracking a lone wolf pup for 6 weeks. The young Arctic wolf, officially designated Wolf 74A in their system, had earned the name Ghost from the research team. The name fit perfectly. His coat was pure white, almost luminous against the snow, and he moved through the landscape like a spirit. He had been separated from his pack during a violent territorial dispute in late autumn. At only 8 months old, surviving alone through an Arctic winter should have been a death sentence. Wolves are pack animals down to their bones. A pup without a pack is a pup that dies. Every textbook says so. Every study confirms it. But Ghost had not died. He had not only survived, he was thriving. Hunting alone, navigating vast frozen stretches, finding shelter in conditions that would kill most adult wolves. His intelligence and adaptability had caught the attention of researchers around the world. Emily had been receiving emails from colleagues in Norway, Russia, and Japan, all asking for updates on the remarkable white wolf pup who was rewriting the rules. Emily's satellite phone crackled to life, slicing through the frozen silence of the morning. The voice on the other end belonged to Jake Thompson, her field assistant, stationed 3 miles north at a secondary observation point. Jake was 29, built like a linebacker, and had the sharpest eyes Emily had ever worked with. He could read an animal's mood from half a mile away through a scope. When Jake spoke, his voice carried an urgency Emily had rarely heard. "Emily, you need to get to Sector 7 right now. I've got Ghost in my scope and he's doing something I have never seen before. He's been in the exact same spot for over 2 hours. That goes against everything we know about lone wolf winter hunting patterns. A wolf doesn't stop moving in these temperatures, not unless something is very wrong or very unusual." Emily didn't hesitate. She grabbed her pack and headed for the snowmobile. In 16 years of fieldwork, she had learned one rule above all others. When a good biologist tells you something doesn't add up, you go look. 20 minutes later, she was cutting through the frozen forest, the snowmobile's engine shattering the silence, sending plumes of snow crystals spiraling in her wake. The temperature gauge on her wrist unit read -36 Celsius. At that temperature, exposed skin begins to freeze in under 3 minutes. Breath turns to ice crystals before it leaves your lips. She found Jake's observation post beneath a massive fallen spruce, its branches heavy with ice. She killed the engine and approached on foot, her boots punching through snow that reached her thighs. Jake was pressed against the eyepiece of a long-range scope. He didn't look up. He just held out the binoculars and whispered. 200 meters northeast, behind the ridge of boulders, Emily, What you're about to see is going to change everything." She raised the binoculars. It took her a moment to find Ghost. His white fur made him nearly invisible against the snowfield. But then she locked onto his amber eyes, glowing like twin embers against all that white, and the picture came into focus. He was larger than she expected for his age. His frame was powerful, his shoulders broad, his stance alert even at rest. He was going to be a magnificent adult wolf. But what she saw next made her hands shake so badly she almost dropped the binoculars. Ghost was not alone. Pressed against his body was another animal, smaller, darker, much darker. As Emily adjusted the focus, the reality of what she was looking at hit her like a physical blow. A bear cub, no more than 4 months old. Dark brown fur matted with ice crystals and streaks of dried blood. One hind leg bent at an angle that no leg should bend. Its breathing was visible in the cold air, but barely. Each exhale was a tiny, labored cloud that seemed weaker than the last. And Ghost, this lone white wolf, this 8-month-old pup who should have been focused entirely on his own desperate survival, had his body curled around the dying cub like armor. His head rested inches from the cub's face. His white fur was pressed against the cub's dark coat, the contrast so stark it looked almost unreal. White against brown, predator against prey, life fighting to save life. Every degree of warmth his body could produce was being given away freely to a creature that by every law of nature should have meant nothing to him. As Emily watched, Ghost lifted his head and ran his tongue gently across the cub's muzzle. Once, twice, a third time, slow, careful, deliberate, like a mother grooming a newborn. Then he settled back down, adjusting his position slightly so that more of his body covered the cub's exposed side. His amber eyes never stopped scanning the horizon for threats. He was a protector. He had decided it, and he was committed to it fully. "How long?" Emily whispered. "Since before dawn. Over 3 hours. I watched Ghost find the cub trapped under a shelf of ice that collapsed during last night's storm. The cub was pinned and crying. Ghost dug it out. Actually dug it out with his paws. And then, instead of doing what any predator on this planet would do, he laid down next to it and hasn't moved since. He's been keeping the cub warm, licking its wounds, trying to keep it alive." Emily lowered the binoculars slowly. Her mind was racing. In 16 years of studying wolves across 3 continents, she had never seen anything remotely close to this. Wolves and bears are competing predators. They share territory, but they do not share kindness. A lone wolf encountering a bear cub would have one of 2 responses. Avoid it, because the mother could be close, and a mother bear will kill a wolf without hesitation. Or, if starvation is pressing, see it as food. But Ghost was doing neither. He was caring for the bear cub with the same protective behavior a wolf shows toward its own pack members. The same body language, the same gentle attention, as if the cub were one of his own. "The mother?" Emily asked. "Gone. I found tracks leading toward the frozen river, at least 12 hours old. The direction she went, with these temperatures, she's either dead or she abandoned the cub. It happens when a mother is too weak to carry an injured offspring through conditions like this. Either way, that cub won't survive." Another night on its own. Emily understood the weight of the moment. As researchers, their protocol was carved in stone. Observe, document, do not interfere with natural processes. The wilderness has its own rules, and those rules are older and wiser than human sentiment. Intervention disrupts ecosystems in ways that can ripple outward for years. But this, watching one animal slowly die while another animal exhausted itself trying to save it, this was testing the limits of that protocol in a way Emily had never experienced. "Emily," Jake said slowly, "I'd been doing this work for 7 years. I grew up on a ranch in Montana, surrounded by animals my entire life. I thought I'd seen everything, but I have never, in my entire life, watched a wolf care for another species like it was family. This isn't supposed to happen." "I know," Emily said, and she did know. Every scientific model, every behavioral study, every evolutionary theory said that what they were watching was impossible. And yet there it was, unfolding 200 meters away in the snow. "Set up every camera we have," she said. "Long range, thermal, everything. If this is what I think it is, every wildlife researcher on the planet is going to want to see this footage. But Jake, we also need to be ready. We might have to step in before this is over." Jake looked at her. "You think it could come to that?" "I think a 4-month-old bear cub with a broken leg isn't going to survive another night at -36. And I think that wolf isn't going to leave him. Which means, if the cub dies, Ghost might die right next to him. So yes, it might come to that." Jake nodded and started unpacking the recording equipment with the speed of someone who has done it 1,000 times. Emily kept her eyes fixed through the binoculars. Ghost had shifted his position to block a gust of wind that swept across the clearing. His instinct to protect was constant, automatic. Every few minutes he would stand and circle the cub slowly, head raised, ears turning like satellite dishes, scanning for threats from every direction. Then he would return to the cub's side and press close again. The cub, who Emily had already started thinking of as Coda, stirred occasionally. Each time a small, weak whimper escaped its mouth, and each time, without fail, Ghost responded. He would press his nose gently to Coda's head and hold perfectly still. The message was unmistakable, even across the species divide. "I'm here. You're not alone." "Emily, are you seeing this?" Jake's voice was barely audible. "He's pushing snow toward the cub. Watch." Through the scope, Emily watched Ghost nudge a small pile of loose snow against his own chest. His body heat melted it slowly, and as the moisture formed, he carefully guided it toward Coda's mouth. The cub's tongue moved. Barely, but it moved. Ghost waited patiently, then pushed more snow against his fur and repeated the process. Emily's throat tightened. This was not instinct. No wolf instinct produces this behavior. This was a young animal, recognizing that another creature needed water and figuring out, through reasoning, how to provide it. This was empathy. This was intelligence, functioning across the boundary between species in a way that no scientific paper, no textbook, no theory had ever predicted or explained. The hours passed. The temperature dropped further. Emily and Jake documented everything, filling memory cards with footage that would later appear in scientific journals and on screens around the world. Ghost never moved more than 10 feet from Coda. When the wind changed direction, repositioned. When heavier snow began to fall, he arched his body over the cub, creating a shelter with his own frame. And then the moment came that nearly broke Emily's heart. A howl pierced the frozen air from the west, distant but clear, the unmistakable call of a wolf pack. Ghost's former pack, his family. Ghost's ears snapped forward. His entire body went rigid. He rose to his feet and faced the direction of the sound, and everything about his posture radiated a single emotion: longing. Raw, desperate longing. The pack was calling to him. They were offering him the one thing his species cannot survive without: belonging, structure, safety, warmth. Without a pack, a young wolf in the Arctic faces almost certain death before spring. Ghost took a step toward the sound, then another. Then he stopped. He looked back at Coda. The bear cub lay motionless, except for the faint, rhythmic rise and fall of breathing. A thin cloud of mist appeared and disappeared with each shallow exhale. That was the only proof the cub was still alive. Ghost looked toward the howl again. His front paw was lifted, ready to run. Every fiber of 10,000 years of evolution was screaming at him to go, to run toward the voices, to rejoin the only social structure that could keep him alive through the months of darkness ahead. Then he looked back at the cub one more time. Jake whispered behind her. He's going to leave. He has to leave. No animal overrides that instinct. Not at his age. Not in these conditions. Emily said nothing. She just watched. Ghost stood like that for a long time, caught between the pull of his own kind and the weight of a responsibility he had chosen without any biological reason to choose it. The pack call came again, fainter now. They were moving on. They were not going to wait. If he was going to follow, it had to be now, right now. Every second of hesitation added distance, added danger, added the growing certainty that he would never find them again. Ghost turned his back on the howl. He walked to Coda's side and laid down, pressing his white fur against the cub's trembling body. He rested his chin on the cub's neck. The pack's voices faded into silence, unanswered. He had chosen. Jake exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for 5 minutes. Did that just happen? Did that actually just happen? Emily couldn't answer right away, because what she had just witnessed didn't fit into any framework she had. An 8-month-old wolf, alone in the deadliest winter landscape on Earth, had chosen a dying stranger over his own survival, compassion over instinct, a bear cub over his own blood, his own kind. Emily didn't try to stop the tears. Behind her, Jake was silent. The camera was recording, but neither of them cared about data or footage in that moment. They had just watched something sacred. As darkness rolled in across the Arctic, Emily faced her own impossible choice. Ghost's devotion was extraordinary, but devotion alone doesn't stop hypothermia. Coda's breathing had weakened steadily throughout the day. The cub's body temperature was falling, and there was nothing Ghost could do about it except keep trying. "We can't let them both die," Jake said quietly. "He's going to burn through his last reserves of energy tonight. If the cold doesn't get the cub, it'll get Ghost. We'll lose them both." Emily nodded. She knew what stepping into that clearing would mean. It would mean crossing a line that researchers are taught never to cross. It would mean interfering with nature's process. Every professor she'd ever studied under, every mentor, every protocol manual she'd ever read said the same thing. You do not interfere. You observe. But none of those professors had ever watched a wolf choose to die beside a bear cub rather than save himself. "You know what the review board is going to say," Jake said. "I know exactly what they're going to say, and I don't care. Not this time." Jake looked at her for a long moment. Then a small smile crossed his face. "Good, because I was going out there with or without permission." "Get the emergency veterinary kit," Emily said. "Contact base camp. We need evacuation support and a full medical team on site by first light tomorrow. Tell them to bring everything: warming blankets, IV equipment, splinting materials. And tell Dr. Hayes we're going to need him to fly in from Anchorage tonight." "Robert Hayes, the chief vet." "This cub needs surgery, Jake, and Ghost needs medical evaluation. He's been out here burning calories he doesn't have for over 24 hours. His body is running on fumes." As she spoke, the northern lights began their slow dance across the sky above. Green and blue ribbons of light stretched over the frozen world, where a white wolf and a bear cub huddled together. One fighting to survive, one refusing to let him fight alone. They had no idea that their story was about to reach every corner of the world. They had no idea that what they had built between them in those frozen hours would force scientists to rethink decades of research. But the biggest shock was still ahead. Because what Ghost did the next morning, when the rescue team finally reached them, was something no one on that team was prepared for. 25 years of veterinary experience, 16 years of wolf research. None of it mattered. What that white wolf did when humans stepped into his clearing left every single person standing in the snow speechless. Some of them cried, and they hadn't even touched the animals yet. And believe me, that's only the beginning of this story. Because what came after the rescue, what happened over the following months and years, was even more extraordinary than anyone could have imagined. The rescue operation began before dawn. In the Canadian Arctic, dawn in January is not really dawn at all. It is a slow bruise of blue light along the horizon that never fully becomes day. Emily and her expanded team moved through the forest in that half-darkness, every step calculated, every sound controlled. Dr. Robert Hayes had arrived from Anchorage at 2 in the morning, traveling by bush plane and then snowmobile through conditions that would have stopped most people from even trying. At 53, Hayes was considered one of the top wildlife veterinarians in North America. He had treated grizzlies, moose, caribou, and wolves across Alaska and northern Canada for 25 years. He had seen things in the wild that most people only read about. But when Emily briefed him on what was waiting in Sector 7, he went quiet for a long time before speaking. "You're telling me a lone wolf pup has been protecting a bear cub through sub-zero temperatures for over 24 hours? That's what I'm telling you. And the wolf won't leave?" He had the chance. His pack called. He stayed. Hayes ran his hand over his face. "In 25 years, I've never heard of anything like this. Not even close." He paused. "How do you want to approach it?" Emily had spent most of the night thinking about exactly that question. The standard protocol for wildlife rescue involved tranquilizing the animal, securing it in a transport crate, and moving it to a treatment facility. Clean, clinical, but nothing about this situation was standard. "The key is to approach them together," Hayes said, as they finalized the plan at the edge of the forest. "If we try to separate them first, the stress could kill the bear cub. Its system is already in crisis. Any spike in cortisol could push it over the edge, and Ghost might bolt or turn aggressive. We've got a wild wolf protecting something he considers his own. That's a dangerous combination if he feels threatened." "So we treat them as a unit," Emily said. "We treat them as a family, because that's what they are, whether it makes scientific sense or not." The team moved forward. Emily and Hayes led, carrying medical equipment designed for field emergencies. Behind them, Jake operated 3 remote cameras that would capture every second. 2 additional researchers, Dr. Megan Cole and field technician Sam Torres, carried warming equipment, transport materials, and emergency supplies. The approach took nearly 2 hours. 2 hours of moving through thigh-deep snow at a pace slow enough to avoid startling either animal. 2 hours of controlled breathing, whispered coordination, and the constant awareness that one wrong move could send Ghost running into the wilderness with injuries they hadn't been able to assess yet. When they finally reached the edge of the clearing, Emily raised her binoculars one last time. Ghost was still there, still curled around Coda, but the wolf looked worse than the day before. His breathing was heavy and visible, each exhale a thick cloud in the frozen air. Ice had formed in the fur around his muzzle, hours of his own breath freezing against his face. His body was trembling slightly, a sign that even his remarkable endurance was reaching its limit. But he was still there, still protecting. Coda had barely moved. The cub's breathing was so shallow that Emily had to watch for almost a full minute to confirm it was still happening. A thin, almost invisible puff of mist. Then another, each one weaker than the last. "We're running out of time," Hayes said beside her, reading the same signs. "That cub is in end-stage hypothermia. If we don't warm him in the next hour, we're going to lose him." Emily nodded. "Then let's go." They stepped into the clearing. Ghost's head came up instantly. His amber eyes locked onto Emily with an intensity that made her freeze mid-step. Every muscle in the wolf's body went taut. His ears pressed forward, his lips pulled back slightly, not quite a snarl, but a warning. A clear message. "Come closer, and I will fight you." Emily held perfectly still. Hayes stopped beside her. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. And then something happened that none of them would ever fully be able to explain. Ghost's eyes moved from Emily's face to the medical bag she carried, then to the warming blankets draped over Hayes's arm, then back to Emily's face. His body language shifted. The tension in his shoulders eased, his lips relaxed, his ears rotated from aggressive forward to a neutral position. He did not stand down entirely. He was still alert, still watchful. But something had changed in his assessment of the situation. "He's reading us," Emily whispered. "He's trying to figure out what we're doing here." "I've seen this behavior in domestic dogs," Hayes said softly, barely moving his lips. "When they have an injured puppy and the owner approaches with a towel or a blanket. They somehow know the difference between a threat and help. But I've never seen it in a wild wolf, not once. Hayes began moving forward again, slowly, each step announced, each movement telegraphed with exaggerated calm. He spoke as he walked, his voice low and steady. "Easy, Ghost. We're here for your friend. We're not going to hurt him. We're not going to hurt you. We're here to help." Ghost watched every step. His eyes tracked Hayes the way a security guard tracks a stranger entering a building, assessing, calculating, deciding. And then, Ghost did something that stopped everyone in their tracks. He stood up. He moved to the side, not away, to the side. He repositioned himself about 3 feet from Coda, giving the humans a clear path to the bear cub while maintaining his own line of sight to everything that was happening. He was giving them access. Jake's voice came through the radio, barely above a whisper. "Are you seeing this? He moved. He actually moved out of the way. He's letting you in." Emily's eyes burned. She blinked hard and kept moving. Hayes knelt beside Coda and began his examination with the speed and precision of someone who understood that every second counted. His hands moved over the cub's body, checking vitals, assessing the injuries, reading the animal's condition through touch and experience. Throughout the entire examination, Ghost stood 3 feet away, watching. His posture was protective, but not threatening. His eyes followed Hayes' hands with focused attention, tracking every movement. When Hayes gently lifted Coda's injured leg to assess the break, Ghost took a half step forward and made a low sound in his throat. Not a growl, something closer to concern. "It's okay, Ghost," Hayes said without looking up. "I know it hurts him. I'm going to fix it." The wolf settled back. "This is unreal," said Megan Cole from behind the cameras. "He understands. He actually understands what's happening." Hayes completed his assessment in under 10 minutes. When he looked up at Emily, his face was grave. Core temperature is dangerously low. Severe dehydration. The hind leg is fractured in 2 places and there's significant soft tissue damage. I'm also hearing fluid in the lungs, which means pneumonia is already setting in. This cub should be dead, Emily. By every medical measure, he should have died 8 hours ago. But he didn't. No, he didn't, because that wolf kept him warm enough to survive. Ghost's body heat is the only reason this cub still has a heartbeat. The team moved quickly after that. Warming blankets were wrapped around Coda. An IV line was started to begin rehydration. Hayes administered medication to stabilize the cub's breathing and began splinting the fractured leg for transport. Ghost watched all of it. He watched the needles. He watched the blankets being wrapped. He watched the splint being applied. And at no point did he interfere. At no point did he show aggression. He simply stood guard, 3 feet away, his amber eyes never leaving the human's hands. "I need to examine Ghost too," Hayes said. "He's exhausted. Probably hasn't eaten in days. He's been burning calories at an incredible rate to maintain body heat for 2 animals in these temperatures. His reserves are gone." Approaching Ghost directly was another matter entirely. The wolf had allowed them near Coda, but that didn't mean he would tolerate being handled himself. Hayes prepared a mild sedative as a precaution, but decided to try a direct approach first. He turned to face Ghost and extended his hand, palm down, the way you would with an unfamiliar dog. Every person in that clearing held their breath. Ghost lowered his head and sniffed Hayes's glove. His nose worked over the leather for several seconds. Then he looked up at the veterinarian and made a soft sound. Not a whimper, not a growl, something in between, something that sounded almost like acknowledgement. "He's letting me in," Hayes said quietly. He began a basic examination while Ghost stood motionless. The wolf was thin under his thick coat, his ribs more prominent than they should have been. His paws were raw in places from hours of pacing in the snow. But his eyes were clear, and his spirit was unbroken. "He's depleted but stable," Hayes announced. "He needs food, water, and rest desperately. But he's going to be fine. This is one tough animal." Now came the challenge that no wildlife manual had ever addressed: transportation. Normal protocol required separate containment for different species. You do not put a wolf and a bear in the same crate. It violates every safety standard in the book. But when Sam Torres brought forward a standard wolf transport crate, and the team attempted to lift Coda into it, Ghost's reaction was immediate. The wolf surged forward, positioning himself between the humans and the cub. His body was trembling with exhaustion, but his stance was unmistakable. "You are not taking him without me." "Stop," Emily called out. "Put the crate down. We can't separate them." "Emily, protocol says..." "I know what protocol says. Protocol also says a wolf can't adopt a bear cub. And look where we are. We build a bigger crate. We transport them together." The team improvised. Using 2 standard crates and emergency materials, they constructed a larger transport container that could hold both animals with enough room for Ghost to maintain physical contact with Coda during the journey. And then Ghost did something that, even after everything they had already witnessed, stunned every person present. Without being guided, without being coaxed, Ghost walked into the transport crate on his own. He moved to the far corner and lay down. Then he turned his head and looked directly at Dr. Hayes. He made a soft whining sound, brief, clear, and then he looked at Coda. "He's telling us to put the cub in," Jake said from behind his camera. His voice was shaking. "He went in first, and he's asking us to bring Coda to him." Hayes looked at Emily. Emily looked at Hayes. Neither of them had words. They carefully lifted Coda and placed the bear cub inside the crate beside Ghost. The moment Coda's body touched the wolf's fur, Ghost adjusted his position. He curled around the cub, tucking the smaller animal against his chest and belly, creating a pocket of warmth. He rested his chin on top of Coda's head and let out a long, slow exhale. They were together. They were safe. And for the first time in over 30 hours, Ghost's body finally relaxed. 25 years, Hayes said quietly, standing over the crate. His eyes were red. 25 years I've been doing this, and I have never seen anything like this. This wolf understands more about loyalty than most humans I've met. Now, if this story is making you feel something, imagine what it was like to be standing in that clearing, watching it happen in real time. If you're still here, drop a comment and tell us what you would have done in Emily's place. Would you have broken protocol? Would you have stepped in? The journey back to the research station took 90 minutes over frozen terrain. The snowmobile pulling the transport sled moved carefully, avoiding sudden jolts. Inside the crate, Ghost maintained his position over Coda the entire time. Whenever the sled hit a bump and Coda stirred or whimpered, Ghost would nuzzle the cub's head gently, settling him back down. The research station had been transformed overnight. The team had cleared the largest building and set up a specialized recovery area, equipped with heating elements, medical monitoring equipment, IV stations, and enough supplies to run an intensive care operation for weeks. A comfortable resting area had been arranged where both animals could stay together during treatment. When the crate was opened at the station, Ghost stepped out first. He surveyed the room with the careful attention of someone inspecting a new home. He sniffed the heating units, he checked the bedding, he walked the perimeter of the space, and then he returned to the crate and stood beside it, looking at the team as if to say, "This will do, bring him in." Coda was transferred to the recovery area, and the real medical work began. Over the next 72 hours, the team fought to save the bear cub's life. It was the kind of fight that swings back and forth, moment to moment, between hope and despair. The first night was the worst. Coda's body temperature had to be raised gradually. Too fast and the shock could stop his heart. Too slow and the hypothermia would cause irreversible organ damage. Hayes and his team worked in shifts, monitoring every fluctuation, adjusting warming protocols minute by minute. Ghost did not sleep that first night. Lay beside Coda's treatment area, his eyes open, watching every person who approached the cub. When monitors beeped, his ears would perk. When a team member injected medication, he would lift his head and watch. When Coda's breathing hitched around 3 in the morning and an alarm sounded, Ghost was on his feet instantly, pressing his nose against the barrier, making urgent sounds until Hayes came running and stabilized the cub's breathing. "This wolf is monitoring the cub's condition better than some of my interns," Hayes remarked during a break. "He knows when something is wrong before the machines do." By the second day, Coda's condition began to stabilize. His core temperature reached a safe range. The IV fluids were restoring hydration. His breathing steadied as the pneumonia medication took effect. Surgery on his fractured leg was scheduled for the following morning. Ghost, finally assured that Coda was no longer in immediate danger, allowed himself to eat and drink for the first time in what the team estimated was at least 3 days. He consumed an enormous amount of food and water, then collapsed beside Coda and slept for nearly 14 hours straight. Even in deep sleep, one paw rested against the bear cub's side. The connection was never broken. Dr. Lisa Morgan, an animal behaviorist from the University of British Columbia, arrived on the 3rd day. She had studied animal cognition for over 2 decades, but nothing in her career had prepared her for what she found at the research station. "What I'm observing here challenges fundamental assumptions about interspecies relationships," she told the team during her first evening briefing. "Ghost has assumed a clearly parental role toward Coda. He alerts the human caretakers when the cub shows signs of distress. He positions himself between Coda and any perceived threat. He grooms the cub regularly. And perhaps most remarkably, he seems to understand that the medical procedures are helping, not hurting." She paused. "Most wild animals perceive medical intervention as an attack. They fight it. They flee from it. Ghost watches the procedures with what I can only describe as trust. That level of cognitive flexibility in a wild wolf is something I have never documented." The leg surgery went well. Hayes repaired the fractures with pins and a lightweight cast designed for wildlife rehabilitation. Throughout the procedure, Ghost waited outside the surgical area, pacing slowly. When Coda was brought out, still groggy from anesthesia, Ghost immediately moved to his side and began licking the cub's face with the same gentle, persistent attention he had shown from the very beginning. As Coda recovered over the following days, the bond between them deepened in ways that fascinated every researcher present. Coda started responding to Ghost not just as a source of warmth, but as his anchor in the world. When the cub was frightened, he pressed against Ghost's side. When he took his first steps on his healing leg, Ghost walked beside him, matching the cub's slow pace with extraordinary patience. When Coda stumbled, Ghost would stop and wait, nosing the cub gently until he was ready to try again. And they began to communicate. Ghost would make a low, rumbling sound, softer than a typical wolf vocalization, and Coda would respond with small, huffing noises that didn't match any standard bear call. They had created their own language, a dialect that belonged only to them. "They're teaching each other," Jake observed during one of his recording sessions. Ghost showed Coda how to push the water bowl with his nose for easier drinking, and Coda figured out how to pull a blanket over both of them, and now Ghost does the same thing. They're learning from each other every single day. By the end of the 2nd week, both animals had recovered enough that the question everyone had been avoiding demanded an answer. What happens now? Coda was too young to survive in the wild alone. Ghost could potentially rejoin a wolf pack, but their bond had become the center of both their worlds. Separating them wasn't just complicated, it was, in the professional opinion of every expert who had observed them, dangerous to both animals' well-being. "We cannot separate them," Hayes concluded, after consultations with wildlife experts across North America. "Their bond is structural. It's become essential to how both animals process the world. Removing it would cause severe psychological harm to both of them." A specialized wildlife sanctuary in Montana had been following Ghost and Coda's story. Their director, Dr. Karen Wells, called Emily directly. "We'll build them their own habitat," Dr. Wells said. 500 acres of managed wilderness, dense forest for shelter, open areas for exercise, water sources, climbing structures for the bear, elevated points for the wolf. We'll give them everything they need to live the life they've created together. The night before they left for Montana, Emily sat in the observation room and wrote in her journal. They have taught us that love is not limited by species. In the harshest place on Earth, where survival should override everything, a wolf chose to stay with a dying stranger. And because of that choice, they both lived. I've studied wolves for 16 years. I thought I understood them. I was wrong. Ghost has shown me that the heart of an animal is bigger than any textbook can hold. Outside the window, the northern lights rippled across the sky as Ghost and Coda lay together in their shared space. Tomorrow would bring a new world. But whatever came, they would face it side by side. And the story was far from over. Because what happened in Montana over the years that followed would take everything you've just heard and elevate it to something no one could have predicted. Ghost and Coda were about to build something that scientists didn't even have a word for yet. 2 years had passed since that frozen morning in the Canadian Arctic when Ghost refused to leave a dying bear cub in the snow. 2 years since a white wolf chose a stranger over his own survival. And in those 2 years, everything had changed. The Montana Sanctuary had become more than a home for Ghost and Coda. It had become a living laboratory, a place where scientists from around the world came to witness something that no textbook had ever described and no theory had ever predicted. 2 animals from 2 different species living as family. Dr. Karen Wells, the sanctuary's director, had spent 30 years working in wildlife rehabilitation. She had seen orphaned animals bond with unlikely companions before. A dog nursing a litter of kittens, a goat befriending a horse. But those were domesticated animals, operating within the safety net of human care. What Ghost and Coda had built was something entirely different. Their bond had been forged in the wild, in life or death conditions, between 2 species that evolution had designed to compete with each other. And it had not only survived the transition to captivity, it had grown stronger. The sanctuary covered 500 acres of carefully managed wilderness in the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. For Ghost and Coda, the team had designed a habitat unlike anything that existed anywhere else in the world. Dense stands of pine and spruce for shelter and denning, open meadows of wild grass for running and playing, a natural stream that wound through the territory, providing fresh water year-round. Climbing boulders and fallen trees for Coda's bear instincts, elevated ridges and observation points where Ghost could survey his domain the way wolves are born to do. They created their own culture, Dr. Wells observed during a morning monitoring session, watching the pair through a remote camera feed. It's not wolf behavior, it's not bear behavior, it's something entirely new, something that takes pieces from both species and combines them into a social system that works for the 2 of them. And the transformation in both animals had been remarkable. Coda had grown into a powerful young black bear. At 2 years old, he weighed close to 200 pounds. His injured leg had healed well, leaving only a slight limp that barely slowed him down. He could climb trees with a speed that startled the staff. He could flip boulders to find insects underneath. He could fish in the stream with a technique that no one had taught him. His intelligence and problem-solving abilities went far beyond what researchers typically observed in bears his age. But what made Coda truly unique were the wolf behaviors he had absorbed from Ghost. He moved through their territory with an awareness of pack dynamics that bears simply do not possess. He would check on Ghost's position before exploring a new area, the way a junior pack member checks in with the alpha. He responded to Ghost's vocalizations with an immediacy that suggested he understood them at a deep level. And when unfamiliar humans entered the habitat for maintenance work, Coda would position himself beside Ghost in a coordinated defensive stance that looked like it came straight out of a wolf pack playbook. Ghost, meanwhile, had matured into one of the most striking Arctic wolves anyone at the sanctuary had ever seen. His coat was pure white, thick and luminous, and his amber eyes held a steady intelligence that made people go quiet when he looked at them. At nearly 100 pounds, he was large for his subspecies, strong, confident. He carried himself with the authority of an animal who had survived the worst the world could throw at him and come out the other side unbroken. Their daily routine fascinated everyone who studied it. Each morning, Ghost would lead what the staff called the patrol. He would move along the perimeter of their territory in a wide, deliberate circuit, marking boundaries in typical wolf fashion. And Coda would follow. The bear would leave his own marks as they went, claw scratches on trees and scent deposits on rocks, creating a dual-species territorial system that had never been documented anywhere in the world. They hunt together, explained Dr. Jennifer Walsh, an animal behaviorist who had been studying the pair for 18 months, and they've developed strategies that maximize both of their natural abilities. Ghost uses his speed to drive small prey toward areas where Coda can use his strength and size to cut off escape routes. They communicate during the hunt using vocalizations and body signals that neither species would use on its own. They invented cooperative hunting techniques from scratch. If you're wondering how two completely different predators learn to work together like a trained team, you're not alone. Every scientist who watched it asked the same question. And the answer they kept coming back to was simple, but profound. Ghost and Coda trusted each other completely. And that trust, built during the worst night of both their lives, had become the foundation for everything else. But the relationship went far deeper than hunting and territory. Ghost and Coda had developed what Dr. Walsh called an emotional support system that operated across species lines. When summer thunderstorms rolled through the mountains, the booming sound terrified Coda. Bears in the wild typically retreat to dens during storms. But Coda's fear response was more intense than normal, possibly a trauma reaction from the ice collapse that had injured him as a cub. Each time thunder cracked across the sky, Coda would freeze, his body trembling, his breathing rapid. And each time, Ghost would appear beside him within seconds. The wolf would press his body against the bear's side and hold perfectly still, the same posture he had used during that first night in the Arctic. The message hadn't changed. I'm here. You're not alone. And gradually, over the course of each storm, Coda's trembling would ease. Ghost had his own demons. The sanctuary staff noticed that the wolf experienced nightmares. He would twitch and whimper in his sleep, his legs moving as if running, his breathing becoming rapid and distressed. Dr. Walsh believed these were trauma responses from his early separation from his birth pack, the violent territorial dispute that had left him alone at 8 months old. When these episodes happened at night, Coda would wake and move to Ghost's side. The bear would press his broad head against the wolf's neck and make soft, steady huffing sounds until Ghost's breathing calmed and the nightmare passed. They've become each other's anchor, Dr. Walsh said, during a conference presentation that was watched by over 2 million people online. Each one carries wounds from their past, and each one has learned to be the medicine for the other's pain. That's not instinct. That's not conditioning. That's love. And I say that as a scientist, not as a sentimentalist. As both animals reached full maturity, the sanctuary team faced questions that no one in the history of wildlife management had ever confronted. Ghost was now at an age where, in the wild, he would be seeking a mate. His biology was programmed to find other wolves, to form a pair bond, to establish a pack and raise pups. Those drives don't disappear because an animal lives in a sanctuary. They are hardwired into every cell. Coda, meanwhile, was entering a phase of life where bears typically become more solitary and territorial. Adult male bears in the wild are loners. They don't maintain close social bonds. The instinct to separate, to claim individual territory, is one of the strongest drives in bear behavior. The question hanging over the sanctuary was simple and terrifying. Would their bond survive the biological forces that evolution had spent millions of years perfecting? The answer came in early spring of their 3rd year together, and it came in the form of a sound. Emily Chen, who had remained deeply involved with Ghost and Coda's care and continued visiting the sanctuary regularly for her ongoing research, was on site when it happened. She was reviewing camera footage in the monitoring room when the audio feed from the eastern boundary of the habitat picked up something that made her blood go cold. Wolf howls. Close. A wild pack had moved into the area surrounding the sanctuary. Ghost's reaction was instantaneous. He was resting near the stream with Coda when the first howl reached him. His head snapped up. His ears rotated toward the sound. His entire body went rigid, with a tension Emily recognized immediately. She had seen it once before, 2 years ago, in the Arctic, when his birth pack had called and he had chosen to stay. But this was different. Ghost didn't just listen. He stood and walked to the eastern fence line, and he began to howl back. The sound of Ghost's howl cutting through the Montana evening was something that shook everyone who heard it. It was deep, resonant, and filled with a longing so raw that 2 staff members in the monitoring room had to leave because they were crying too hard to see the screens. This was the call of a wolf who had spent 2 years without his own kind. A wolf who had poured every ounce of his social instinct into caring for a bear, and who was now, for the first time since Alaska, hearing the voices of animals like himself. For the first time since leaving the Arctic, Ghost showed intense interest in his own species, Emily recorded in her observation notes. He spent hours at the boundary, howling responses to the wild pack's calls. His body language suggested profound emotional activation, excitement, longing, conflict. Because that was the crux of it, conflict. The same conflict Emily had watched play out in the Arctic snow. Ghost's instincts were pulling him toward the wolves outside the fence, but his heart was inside the fence with Coda. "We faced an ethical dilemma with no precedent," Dr. Wells explained to her board of directors during an emergency meeting. Ghost is displaying healthy, natural responses to his own species. Denying him the opportunity to interact with other wolves could be considered a form of psychological harm. But we also can't ignore the bond that has sustained him for 2 years. Any decision we make has consequences. The team designed an experiment, carefully, methodically. They arranged for a controlled meeting between Ghost and 2 young wolves from the wild pack. A male and a female, both roughly Ghost's age, were temporarily brought into a secure enclosure adjacent to Ghost and Coda's habitat. The setup allowed physical proximity and sensory contact while maintaining safety. And critically, it ensured that Coda remained within sight and scent range of Ghost at all times. The meeting took place on a clear Tuesday morning. Ghost approached the enclosure boundary with obvious excitement. His tail was high, his posture was alert and engaged. When he caught the scent of the 2 wild wolves, his whole body seemed to vibrate with energy. He displayed classic wolf social behaviors, play bows, scent marking, vocalizations that the staff hadn't heard him make in 2 years. For the first time since he was a pup, Ghost was being a wolf among wolves. Emily watched from the observation platform with tears streaming down her face. Not from sadness, from the pure, overwhelming beauty of watching an animal reconnect with something essential that had been missing from his life. The female wolf, a graceful silver-white animal the team named Aurora for the pale shimmer of her coat, showed particular interest in Ghost from the start. She mirrored his play bows. She pressed against the fence where he pressed. Their noses touched through the barrier, and Ghost made a sound that was so gentle, so quiet, that the microphones barely captured it. But here is what stunned the researchers. Throughout every minute of the interaction, Ghost kept checking on Coda. Every few minutes, without fail, Ghost would break away from the wild wolves and trot back to the boundary of his home territory where Coda waited. He would touch noses with the bear through the fence. He would circle Coda once, checking that everything was fine. And then he would return to the wolves, back and forth, over and over, never forgetting, never abandoning. And Coda's response was equally remarkable. The bear showed no distress, no jealousy, no signs of anxiety at watching Ghost interact with other wolves. He waited patiently each time Ghost left and greeted him calmly each time he returned. At one point, Coda moved closer to the boundary fence and sat down where he could observe the wolf interactions directly. Dr. Walsh described his posture as parental pride. What we witnessed destroyed our assumptions about animal social flexibility, Dr. Walsh wrote in her research notes. Ghost was able to engage fully with his own species while maintaining his primary bond with Coda completely intact. He didn't have to choose, he could be both. A wolf among wolves and Coda's family. He had become, for lack of a better term, bilingual in love. The experiment continued for several days. Ghost formed genuine connections with both wild wolves, but his bond with Aurora deepened quickly. Their interactions evolved from playful to something the researchers recognized as the early stages of courtship. They would walk in parallel along the fence line. They would rest near each other. Aurora began making soft, whining calls when Ghost moved away, and Ghost would answer with a low, steady vocalization that was different from anything he used with other animals. "We faced another decision that no one had ever had to make," Dr. Wells recalled. Aurora was a healthy wild wolf. If she and Ghost formed a mated pair, pups would be genetically valuable for wild population recovery. But bringing a wild wolf into Ghost and Coda's habitat meant introducing a predator directly into a space shared by a bear. Every natural instinct should have made that dangerous. The decision was made gradually, over weeks of careful assessment. Aurora was moved into an adjacent area where she and Ghost could interact freely, while Coda was introduced to her presence slowly and under controlled conditions. And what happened defied every prediction. Aurora did not react to Coda with aggression. She didn't react with fear. She reacted with curiosity. She watched the bear the way someone watches a new co-worker on their first day. Careful, interested, open. Ghost played a role that no animal behaviorist had ever described in scientific literature. He actively mediated between his two worlds. He would spend time with Aurora, then bring her closer to Coda's area. He would position himself between the two animals during their first face-to-face encounters, his body language clearly communicating calm and safety to both. He groomed Aurora, then he groomed Coda, then he sat between them, looking from one to the other, as if saying, "This is my family. All of it. Get used to each other." It was the most sophisticated social negotiation I have ever observed in any animal species, including primates, Dr. Walsh said. Ghost was functioning as a diplomat, a translator, and a family patriarch all at once. Within 2 weeks, Aurora had accepted Coda. Not tolerated, accepted. She would rest near him without tension. She would share feeding areas. She even began engaging in brief, tentative play sessions with the bear, batting at him with her paws, the way wolves play with pack members. They formed a triangle that defied every rule of species interaction, Emily observed during one of her research visits. Aurora accepted Coda because Ghost made it absolutely clear through every behavior he displayed that the bear was family, non-negotiable. And Aurora, being an intelligent wolf, read that signal and adapted to it rather than fighting it. By autumn, Aurora had moved permanently into the shared habitat. The three animals lived together in a social structure that the research team called a hybrid family unit. It combined elements of wolf pack hierarchy with the interspecies bonding that had always been the foundation of Ghost and Coda's relationship. Ghost patrolled with both Coda and Aurora. Coda fished in the stream, while Aurora watched from the bank, occasionally snapping at the splashing water like a puppy. Aurora and Ghost curled together at night in a den they had dug beneath a fallen pine, while Coda slept against a boulder 10 feet away, close enough to hear them breathe. It was working. Against every expectation, against every model, against every assumption about how nature operates, it was working. And then, Aurora became pregnant. The sanctuary held its breath. Wolf pups, being born into a habitat shared with a bear, was completely uncharted territory. The risks were real. Bears in the wild are known to prey on wolf pups. A mother wolf with newborns is at her most protective and her most dangerous. Every instinct should have told Aurora to drive Coda away, violently if necessary. Dr. Wells assembled her entire team for planning. Contingency plans were drawn up. Separation barriers were prepared. Emergency protocols were established. Everyone was ready for the moment when nature's rules would finally override the extraordinary bond these animals had built. That moment never came. Aurora gave birth to 3 healthy pups on a cool spring morning, 2 females and a male. All 3 had the pale, creamy white fur of their Arctic wolf heritage, with tiny pink noses and closed eyes that would open days later to reveal amber irises identical to Ghost's. And when Coda approached the den for the first time after the birth, moving slowly, carefully, making soft, huffing sounds, Aurora looked at Ghost. Ghost looked at Aurora, and then Aurora stepped aside and let the bear see the pups. Coda lowered his massive head into the den opening and sniffed each pup gently. One of them squirmed toward his warm breath. Coda pulled back and looked at Ghost. Ghost wagged his tail, and that was it. The pups had an uncle, a 200-pound bear uncle who would, over the coming weeks, prove to be one of the most patient and gentle babysitters the animal kingdom had ever produced. The pups changed everything. Ghost and Aurora's 3 offspring, 2 females the team named Frost and Winter, and a male they called Storm, grew fast. Within weeks they were tumbling out of the den on unsteady legs, exploring a world that no wolf pups in history had ever been born into. A world where a bear was family. Coda took to his role as uncle with a gentleness that made grown researchers cry on camera. He would lie flat on his belly in the meadow while the pups climbed over him, pulling his ears, chewing on his fur, tackling his massive paws. He never swatted. He never growled. He would occasionally lift one paw and gently roll a pup onto its back, holding it there while it squirmed and yipped, then releasing it to come charging back for more. The patience Coda shows with those pups is beyond anything I've documented in interspecies relationships, Dr. Walsh noted. He adjusts his strength instinctively. He knows exactly how much force is safe, and when a pup wanders too far from the den, Coda is often the first one to notice. He'll herd it back with his nose, the way a sheepdog moves livestock. He learned that from watching Ghost. Ghost, meanwhile, was becoming the father he was always meant to be. He taught the pups to stalk. He taught them to listen. He brought them small prey items and demonstrated how to eat. He disciplined them with soft growls when they misbehaved and rewarded them with play when they followed his lead. Aurora handled the nursing and the close physical care, but Ghost ran the education program. And the pups grew up believing that bears were part of the family. To them, Coda wasn't strange. He wasn't a different species. He was Uncle Coda, the big warm thing that let them sleep on his belly when Dad was busy and Mom needed a break. The one who always found the best spots to dig for grubs. The one who smelled different from everyone else, but was always there. Dr. Lisa Morgan, who had been studying the family since the early days, made an observation that sent ripples through the scientific community. These pups are developing social behaviors that combine wolf and bear elements in ways we've never seen. Storm follows Coda to the stream and watches him fish. He's tried to catch fish himself using techniques he learned from the bear, not from his wolf parents. Frost and Winter have adopted a play style that mixes wolf wrestling with bear-style swatting. They're creating hybrid behaviors in real time. One afternoon, the staff watched through the cameras as something unfolded that left everyone in the monitoring room in stunned silence. Storm had followed Coda to the stream as usual. The young wolf stood at the water's edge, watching the bear swipe at passing fish with practiced ease. Storm crouched, he waited, and then he lunged, plunging his muzzle into the water and coming up with a small trout clamped in his jaws. He looked at Coda. Coda looked at him. Storm's tail wagged so fast, it was a blur. He had learned to fish. A wolf had learned to fish by watching a bear. Dr. Walsh replayed that footage over 40 times and still shook her head every time. Meanwhile, Coda had picked up something from the wolves that bears are not supposed to do. He howled. Not a true wolf howl, it was deeper, rougher, more like a long, low moan that rose and fell. But the timing was unmistakable. When Ghost and Aurora raised their voices to the night sky, Coda would join in. The pups would follow, and for a few minutes, the Montana hillside would echo with the sound of a family singing together in a language that belonged to no single species. The family had invented its own way of living. Not wolf, not bear, something new. 5 years had now passed since that frozen morning in the Arctic. 5 years since a white wolf pup found a dying bear cub under collapsed ice and made a choice that changed everything. Ghost was in his prime, strong, calm, wise in a way that went beyond animal intelligence. Coda had grown into a magnificent bear, over 300 pounds, with a gentle spirit that contradicted every stereotype about his species. Aurora had become the steady heart of the family, her wild instincts balanced perfectly by the unusual social world she had chosen to join. And the pups were becoming young wolves, who would carry the lessons of their extraordinary upbringing into whatever future lay ahead. Emily Carter, now recognized as one of the world's leading experts on interspecies relationships, visited the sanctuary that autumn for what she expected to be a routine research trip. She had made dozens of these visits over the years. She knew Ghost and Coda's routines by heart. She could predict their behaviors before they happened. But on the third night of her visit, something happened that she did not predict. Something that no one predicted. Emily was reviewing camera footage in the monitoring room when the motion sensors on the northern boundary triggered an alert. She pulled up the feed and saw shapes moving in the darkness beyond the fence. Wolves. A large pack, at least 8 animals. They were moving along the perimeter, their bodies low, their movements purposeful. This wasn't unusual. Wild wolf packs occasionally passed through the area. They would howl. Ghost would howl back. They would move on. It had happened dozens of times. But tonight was different, because as Emily watched, one of the wolves separated from the pack and approached the fence. It moved slowly, deliberately. And when it reached the barrier, it stopped and sat down. It raised its head and let out a howl that was different from any territorial call Emily had ever recorded. It was softer, searching, almost questioning. Ghost, who had been sleeping near the den with Aurora and the pups, was on his feet in an instant. He moved to the fence with a speed that startled Emily, and when he reached the wild wolf on the other side, he stopped. His tail dropped, his ears went flat. His entire body posture shifted into something Emily had only seen in wolf reunion footage. Submission, recognition, joy. The wild wolf pressed its nose through the fence. Ghost pressed back. They held that position for a long time, breathing each other in. Emily's hands were shaking as she zoomed the camera in. The wild wolf was large, female, old. Her muzzle was grey with age, and she moved with the careful deliberation of an animal who had survived many winters. There was a scar across her left shoulder that Emily recognized from photographs in her own research files. She pulled up the database, cross-referenced the scar pattern, checked the GPS records from 5 years ago, and when the match appeared on her screen, Emily had to grip the edge of the desk to keep herself upright. The wolf at the fence was designated F19. She was the alpha female of the Wapusk pack, the pack Ghost had been born into, the pack that had called to him on that frozen night when he chose to stay with Coda. F19 was Ghost's mother. She had found him, after 5 years, across hundreds of miles, through territories controlled by rival packs who would have killed her on sight, across mountain ranges and frozen rivers and vast stretches of wilderness that should have erased any scent, any trace, any possible connection. Wolf biologists had long debated whether wolves could track family members over extreme distances. The prevailing opinion was that they could not. That pack bonds, once broken by distance and time, were gone forever. F-19 had just destroyed that theory. She had spent 5 years searching for her son, and she had found him in a sanctuary in Montana, 1,000 miles from where she last saw him. Emily couldn't move. She couldn't breathe. She watched through the camera as Ghost and his mother stood nose to nose through the fence, making sounds so quiet that the audio sensors could barely detect them. Small whimpers, soft rumbles, the private language of a mother and child reunited after years of separation. Ghost's body was trembling, not from cold, not from fear, from something that scientists don't have a good word for, but that every person watching the footage would instantly recognize. And then, Ghost did something that proved, once and for all, that this animal understood the world at a depth that science was only beginning to comprehend. He turned away from his mother. He walked back toward the den, and one by one brought his family to meet her. First, Aurora. The two females sniffed each other cautiously, then touched noses. Then Coda, who approached the fence slowly, his massive frame dwarfing the old wolf on the other side. F-19 startled slightly at the sight of a bear approaching, but Ghost positioned himself between them, his body language radiating calm, and the old wolf settled. She sniffed Coda through the barrier. Coda sniffed back, and that was enough. Then the pups, 3 young wolves tumbling over each other in their excitement, pressing their tiny noses through the fence to meet the grandmother they never knew they had. Emily was sobbing at the monitoring desk. She was not the only one. Dr. Wells, who had come running when the sensors triggered, stood behind her with both hands over her mouth and tears running down her face. F-19 stayed at the fence until dawn. Her pack waited in the tree line, patient, as if they understood that their alpha needed this time. As the first light crept across the mountains, the old wolf stood, touched noses with Ghost one final time, and turned back toward the wilderness. She paused once and looked over her shoulder. Ghost was still at the fence, watching her go. Then she disappeared into the trees, and her pack followed, and they were gone. Ghost stood at the fence for a long time after that. The sun was climbing. The pups had fallen asleep in a pile near the den. Aurora watched from a distance, giving Ghost the space he needed. Then Coda walked up beside him and sat down. The bear didn't touch the wolf. He didn't make a sound. He just sat there, present, steady, the same way he had been present and steady from the very first moment, when he was a 4-month-old cub with a broken leg, and a white wolf was the only thing standing between him and death. Ghost leaned his shoulder against Coda's side. The bear leaned back. They stayed like that as the sun came up over Montana, 2 animals who had no business being friends, no business being family, no business being anything to each other at all. And yet, here they were, together, after everything. If this story moved you, if you felt something watching this journey from a frozen clearing in the Arctic to a moonlit fence in Montana, then you understand what Ghost and Coda taught the world. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. Emily published her landmark book about Ghost and Coda the following year. It became the most widely read wildlife study of the decade. The final chapter contained a passage that was quoted in newspapers, research papers, and classrooms around the world. Love is not limited by species, by instinct, or by the harsh laws of survival. Sometimes, in the most unlikely circumstances, 2 souls recognize each other across every boundary that nature has built. And when that recognition happens, it creates something stronger than instinct, more powerful than survival, and more enduring than the forces that brought them together. Ghost could have left that bear cub in the snow. Every rule of nature said he should have. Instead, he chose to stay. And that single choice, made by a starving 8-month-old wolf pup in the worst cold on Earth, rippled outward for years. It saved a life. It built a family. It changed science. And it proved that the most powerful force in nature is not the drive to survive, but the capacity to care for others, even when everything in the world says such caring is impossible. The sanctuary continued to thrive. Ghost patrolled his territory every morning with Coda at his side and Aurora at his flank. The pups grew into strong young wolves who carried something unique in their understanding of the world. the knowledge that family is not defined by blood or species, but by the choice to stay. On clear nights, when the sky was dark enough, the northern lights would sometimes appear over Montana. Faint, distant, nothing like the brilliant displays of the Arctic. But on those nights, Ghost would sit on the highest ridge in the habitat and stare north. Coda would settle beside him. Aurora would come eventually, pressing her side against Ghost's. And sometimes, the pups would join, sitting in a line along the ridge, a family of wolves and a bear, silhouetted against a sky that connected them to a place none of the younger ones had ever been, but all of them somehow understood. Emily watched them on one of those nights from the observation deck. She had spent 5 years studying this family. She had written hundreds of pages of research notes. She had given lectures on every continent. And yet, standing there, watching a white wolf and a black bear sit together under the northern lights, she still felt the same thing she had felt that first morning in the Arctic when she saw Ghost curled around a dying cub. Wonder. Pure, unfiltered wonder at what the animal heart is capable of. A frozen clearing, a collapsed shelf of ice, a dying cub, and a white wolf who refused to walk away. Some stories begin with a roar. This one began with a choice. The quietest, bravest choice an animal has ever made. And it changed everything.